Okay, good evening. Thank you for coming and for another event from the series Café Chalupecký, which is organized by Jindřich Chalupecký Society. And it's my great pleasure to welcome our guests from Berlin, Katharina Koch and Sylvie Sadzinski, who are curators, academicians, and teachers. And tonight they will talk about curatorial practice affected by feminist theory and feminist thoughts and feminist curatorial way of doing show and programming. And they will talk more about specific space in Berlin, a project space called Alfa Nova Galerie Futura, which they are both directors. Katharina is the executive director since 2012, and Sylvia is a program director since 2019, but the project itself was established already in 1986, and we are curious to hear more about the development and the current state of this programming. So thank you very much for being here with us.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. So, yeah, just to say my name again, so I'm Katharina Koch, and as Teresa already said, I'm one of the artistic directors of Alfa Nova and Galerie Futura since 2012. And next to me is
the other director, the other one. My name is Sylvie Sadzinski, yes, and have been working for Alfa Nova and Galerie Futura since October 2019.
Yeah, and first of all, we would like to thank the curatorial collective of Heinrich Chalupecký Society for the invitation and the opportunity to present the work of Alfa Nova and Galerie Futura, so our work as curators and also our practices with Alfa Nova and Galerie Futura. And this lecture is called In a Feminist Way, Perspectives and Challenges of a Curatorial Space in Berlin and Beyond. And yeah, and we will give now a brief or not so brief, but kind of insight into our work and by presenting the concept and self-positioning of the space Alfa Nova and Galerie Futura, resulting practices as well as challenges that we have to face on a daily basis. So Alfa Nova and Galerie Futura is an art space for exhibition and cultural events with an explicit emancipatory and feminist perspective and focuses on collaborations with women or female identified artists. Up to 5 or 6 thematic-based solo and group exhibitions are realized per year, as well as performances, lectures, discussions, workshops, and other corresponding presentations. And we are a non-commercial space which is institutional funded by the Berlin City Council. So this is the building in which is the space located on the 2nd floor. And the project was founded already in 1986 in former West Berlin. And based on a feminist self-concept, it wants to create a space which combines political interventions and artistic practices to develop critical perspectives for the artistic and academic communities and as well as for society at large. So, yeah, this is also a very old picture from the 80s because already in the 80s it was founded in former West Berlin, and it was started as an explicit women's project agitating for the visibility of women artists and acting in the spirit of the second wave feminism in Western Germany for fighting for women's rights, participation and emancipation. And it was initiated by activists organized in the women's peace movement in former West Berlin. And so the gallery space functioned from begin on as a political space, which linked activism and artistic practices. Yeah, and after 25 years, a generational change in the curatorial conduction of the space was initiated. So in 2012, my former colleague Anne Kohl and we overtook the project as new art directors, and since then Alfa Nova and Galerie Futura has been organized and programmed always by 2 artistic directors. The generational change went along with a strong reflection on shifts and developments in positions, practices, and strategies of feminist art curating. And as new artistic directors, we ask ourselves questions like, what ideal demands do we associate with the production of a feminist art space? What external and internal realities are we confronted with? What power positions do we assume as artistic directors, and how do we deal with the role in a reflective and transparent manner? What does a feminist practice of curating mean in this context? The social and political context, as well as feminist theories and politics, have changed within the last decades. So women isn't thought as a fixed or certain identity anymore. Instead, gender is theorized and as socially produced, and the interdependencies with other social categories are stressed, like race, class, age, religion, health, social participation, which always imply a hierarchy and inequality. And feminist politics today, also in the arts, focus on the production and reproduction of these inequalities, which are still very present in our societies. In this sense, we understand feminist concerns always as political ones, but running a feminist art space does not mean exclusively talking about gender-related issues to us or highlighting marginalized topics, but it's more about discussing non-hierarchical ways of knowledge production and collaboration, and non-hierarchical forms of exhibiting and representation and turning them into practice. And moreover, it means a strong reflection on our own involvement into power relations, a reflection on our reproduction also of exclusions by choosing certain topics or by inviting certain people to collaborate. And this requires also a strong reflection on our own privileges as white academic women who are running the space. However, we do not consider feminism as women's fight, but instead as a plural concept to criticize and fight hegemonic power relations that lead to inequality and exclusions. And we want to strengthen an intersectional thinking, so it means the interaction of various identifying characteristics, like race and gender, for example, that must be examined in their intersections rather than individually. It's necessary to effectively recognize these social constructs in their entirety as forms of discrimination. We understand our work as feminist activism, and for us this means the permanent examination and reflection of ideals and feminist theories versus real conditions in order to generate corresponding practices. And this requires a constant reality check also. As well as a change of perspective regarding different forms of production, knowledge production, but beyond the academic ones. Within this framework, we ally ourselves with other activists from the field of art, culture, and social and political practice in the long term, and sometimes only in the short term for specific projects. And our ideals is to create experiences and knowledge beyond the logics of representation, as based on a subjective and experiences, production of identity, and on social participation, on non-hierarchical structures, and on solidary collective collaborations with all kinds of gender. So these are really the ideal situation, but what does the reality look like? So in everyday practice, in collaborations, in implementation of projects, exhibitions and events, and in the context of support institutions, these ideals always meet with hurdles, contradiction, doubts. And also another challenge is that the audience is mostly generated out of similar communities, so we reproduce often a kind of circle, echo chamber, if you want to name it like this. Yeah, but before we go into these more problematic aspects, we would like to present 2 projects that we realized in the last year, and we would consider them as feminist motivated in terms of the issues they raise, but also in terms of the implementation.
Yes, so maybe I'm going to move this a bit closer. So one of the projects we did is called, as you can see here, Feminist Housing, Her Stories for the Future, Berlin, Bauhaus and Beyond. And it consisted of 2 parts, actually, in 2019. It happened in 2019 and 2020. The exhibition and event series took the 100th anniversary of the founding of the Bauhaus as an opportunity to visualize the connections and divergences with like a very universalist neutral value canon of modern living, as it was paradigmatically propagated by the Bauhaus. And to counter this, early protagonists of the architectural world and feminist discussions about spatial and urban planning were presented. Here, gender relations became visible as diverse, asymmetrical ideas of living, of personal relationships, and professional life. And this is part of like the flyer. And so the first part that was happening in 2019 was dedicated to the so-called pioneers of the 1920s and their understanding of architecture, of living and urban activism. And it consisted of an exhibition by Austrian but Berlin-based artist Moira Zeutel, who critically examined the so-called Frankfurt Kitchen in a 2-part video installation. So you can see here the Frankfurt Kitchen is seen as like somehow like a blueprint version for the modern kitchen, so that like kind of women, they don't like really need to move a lot in the kitchen space. So something that like right now we would like kind of maybe not consider really feminist, but of course like back then it helped to make the movement and the task associated with female labor and care work easier. And another part of the exhibition you can see here was like this Frankfurt Kitchen was also like co-developed by Austrian architect Margarete Schütte-Lihotzky in 1926. And Moira Zeutel's work, Kitchen Torso, evoked these systematic studies of the rationalized housework conducted in the early 20th century. And these studies were also, of course, inspired by Taylorist thinking, so how to make everything more functionable. And in addition to the exhibition, and this is like what we often do, so when we have exhibitions, we always plan a discursive side program that is expanding the exhibition or like putting them into like current discourses. So here, within this project, the first part of the series was complemented by several lectures that rethought structures and concepts of home and the household, and presented the history of architectural modernity and historic demands for feminist emancipation, among other for better housing conditions in the working class districts of large cities and community housing projects for women. So all of this like really in the like historical sense. And then the second part of the project happened a year later, as we said, so in 2020. And this one happened in close collaboration with architects and urban theorists from the Technical University of Berlin, of the Chair of Urban Design and Urbanization. And this part was discussed, or like kind of like discussed the impacts of the so-called second women's movement on architecture, living, housing, and activism on the present in our like very contradictory globalized economies. It aimed to present feminist and inclusive approaches and alternatives for the future of housing, living, and architecture. And our main question here of this project was also the title of the exhibition, called A Feminist Perspective for Berlin Today. What could a non-sexist city look like? Yeah. And this time, the curatorial collective of this project, so it was like us and the other people from the chair of the Technical University, of the Chair for Urban Design and Urbanization, we decided to launch an open call, and you could like see the open call here again in the, oops, no, spoiling. So you could see the open call here. So we kind of, has like asked for people to, we launched this open call for the exhibition, and we asked artists to apply with their projects, with their ideas, and finally selected 6 proposals in a joint jury session. And in this, and you can see what was like kind of the outcome then of this open call. So in interactive, mostly interactive installations and photographs and sketches, as well as sound and text works, the artists and urban activists, namely Sarah Held, Elke Krasny, Sophie Link, and Claudia Lomoschitz, who came from Vienna to Berlin, and then Dorothea Nold, Banu Zizek-Tüli, Lena Wegmann, and Ina Wuttke, who were in Berlin and partly in Leipzig, addressed current urban and social imbalances and developed feminist visions of an urban policy for a discrimination-free future, or hopefully discrimination-free future. And so you can see, like here, also, like, I mean, you saw it before, the space, our space has around 70 square meters, so it's not like, I mean, it's a small space somehow for big ideas, I would say. But yeah, you can already kind of see some of the artistic approaches here. The street sign, like reminds us of street signs in Berlin, is by Ina Wuttke, and you can already see here the sound installation that I will discuss a bit later. But first, so one of the projects selected was by artist Dorothea Nold, and Dorothea was here presenting a visionary construction project called Montfermeil. And this one proposed a new usage for the former Humboldt Forum, and for so the Humboldt Forum is it's a very controversial building in the city center of Berlin that was like kind of rebuilt and is highly criticized for re-implementing a lot of like colonial ideas and theories, and cost like a bunch of money to reconstruct it. So yeah. And people were, of course, like saying, okay, actually, like Berlin has a housing crisis, and artists would also like need the money. So why do you reconstruct a castle full of like colonial damages? Yeah. But like here, Dorothea Nold unites this inclusivity and with a communal and affordable living and working models that is geared to different needs of its inhabitants, while also being centrally located with an ecological convincing recreational area. So you could see here on this like Montfermeil, everything is happening. People are living. People are working. People are creating the space. So it kind of reminds us as a project that might be realized already in 2023. Great. So next year. And the other one was an audio installation. You can see here now the space from the other side. Was the audio installation Sonic Body Map by Banu Zizek-Tüli. And in her work, Banu considered walking as a privilege act because, as some of us might know, for women and LGBTIQA communities, also for migrants or for people of color and people with disabilities, it can be rather challenging, unsafe, and even dangerous to move through public space. And here the artwork combined recordings of the artist's steps, her heartbeat, her breath as she moved through the streets, confronted with different encounters, and among them, of course, like also harassment, street harassment. So you could like then, this is by the way the artist in her own sound installation. So you could experience how Banu Zizek-Tüli, how her body was like sensory reacting to being in public space. And another project that we want to present, or like kind of like another artistic contribution to how a feminist or like a non-sexist city could look like, was this interactive installation called Critical Nail Care by Lena Wegmann. And it pointed out the connections of care work with sexist, racist, and also classist attributions, as well as with experiences of marginalization and precarity. Here, visitors were invited to paint each other's nails and to perform or receive care work during the experiences and engage in critical conversations. So you can see here, Lena Wegmann created tiny little information sheets or cards that were like a suggestion for possible topics to discuss, and of course, I mean, we all know, we also had like this conversation today that nail care, nail studios, they are very precarious, conducted by certain community groups, and of course, like here, this was also addressed, and yeah. And then there was a workshop that in the end turned out, or was like manifested on the streets, and it was Sarah Held from Vienna conducted this Berlin Girl Gang workshop where together with the participants, and maybe you can see some of them that like already look familiar. So the participants were invited to stage themselves as wild and dangerous as they would like to face potential harassers in public space. So there was like a photo shooting beforehand, and you could just like grab any objects that you could find in the gallery space. Then there was like photos taken. And so just like kind of to feel empowered. How would you feel empowered in public space? And these photos were then, as you can see here, printed out, and yeah, and this life-size photograph of the girl gang, so-called Berlin Girl Gang, were then pasted in urban places, and in places where people of the group said they feel like kind of like not secure or insecure, or like they have been like often harassed. Yeah, so just like kind of, so next time when they walk there and pass there, they can see, you know, you have my back, I have your back, the girl gang is there. Yeah, so the project not only appropriated the urban space, but also wanted to empower those affected by sexist or harassment in general. And the general project was also then accompanied by students, and not only by the lecturers and like the co-curators of the chair of urban design and urbanization from the University of Art, from the Technical University, but also by students from the University of Arts in Berlin. And they created during a one-week mapping camp somehow a cartographic spatial installation called FemMap. And here they were spatially analyzing with like artistic and social research method that like the urban space in Berlin. This kind of seminar, like week-long camp, was guided by the questions: what does a feminist appropriation of urban space mean for critical planning practices? And the essential elements of these mappings were brought together to a form and a shared vision for the future of Berlin as a cartographic spatial installation, the FemMap, that you can see here. And so this FemMap, it consisted of different topics, for example, like care work, and you could really see they were like creating this map with some future ideas, but also with like kind of some spaces that have been always like very crucial for feminist or queer feminist understanding of the city. And then the exhibition was also, the whole exhibition project was accompanied by a film program and a symposium with integrational urban practitioners and theorists from like internationally. And finally, a guided audio walk through the neighborhood took place. And this was organized by a group of feminist architects called FemArc, who do like very amazing podcasts. So if you want to check them out, it's really worth checking them out. And here this kind of like audio tour or audio walk was allowing the participants to experience emancipatory practices and spaces together with different narrative figures as they walk alone through the city. So they invited guests to also like hear and listen to their experiences when they walk through a city. And by redesigning the city walk, which was initially planned as a collective experiences, the initiators of the group FemArc responded to the pandemic situation, since then like kind of it was not possible to do it all together. So the question was here, how can we collectively experience feminist spatial practices despite physical distance? So then like kind of we all gathered together, and then like everybody could like have the QR code and walk through the area with this audio tour. Here you can see the participants. Yeah, and as the curatorial collective of the project, it was important to us to bring together as many different perspectives as possible on the core topic of urban planning, design, construction, housing, and living together. The subjective and collective experience of public urban spaces and the asymmetrical gender and class relations embedded within them were other key focuses of the project, as well as experiences of sexism, racism, anti-Semitism, and ableism that always appear when talking about harassment and the city. By drawing upon these diverse, irrelated experiences, we sought to promote exchange between the participants and the audience. And for this reason, we have invited artistic projects and those from urban practice that have realized interactive and process-based forms of presentation in particular.
Yeah, and this is the second project example we would like to present to you. So it is called Revolt, She Said, Decolonial and Feminist Perspectives on 68. And it was a collaborative project between Alpha Nova and Galerie Futura and the Berlin-based art space district. And it took place in 2018. And it linked the themes of intergenerational exchange, intersectionality, and decolonial perspectives. And Revolt, She Said, was not an exhibition, but it was an event series with lectures, talks, screenings, workshops, performances, and presentations. And it was designed in conversation, in really close conversation with the participating artists, curators, and activists and academics. And again, we took the opportunity on the occasion of this time 50th anniversary of 1968 to engage from feminist and decolonial perspective with the protest movements in Germany in the late 60s. And as we all know, these protest movements were also fully redefined the field of art. And as initiators, we were moved by the question of which histories, participants, and voices still remain invisible within the dominant narratives about 1968, and how they can be reactualized for the contemplation and creation of present and future socio-political processes and demands. So the pictures you will see now, the images, they are all connected, of course, to this project, but I won't say not to each of it something, so just to get an impression. The idea of the project was to reassess the production of narratives and historiography and to retell the movements of this time from the perspective of their feminist, anti-colonial, diasporic, migrant, Jewish, and Black organizations. And although the single events highlighted different communities, viewpoints, and aspects, all of them foster an intergenerational exchange. And all of them have been drawn an arc into the present in order to analyze the positions, experiences, and stories in the future, in the frame of today's social and political contexts. So the main concern was to learn about historical contexts, marginalized knowledge production, and current cultures of remembrance through voices that haven't had and still did not have a broader visibility in a broader public discourse. And that means at the same time also trying to unlearn about dominant images, collective remembrances, and symbols connected to 1968 that are mostly driven by white male perspectives. So this is Peggy Piesche, one amazing scholar in literature and cultural studies, and she claimed to decolonize time as well as the dominant collective memory on certain historical events and time frames. And she stated that we all have to review constantly our viewpoints that are dominated by hegemonic images in historiography, and that we have to break with those narratives in order to learn, to get a new view, to see really, to explore other sources, media, logics, communities and perspectives as relevant parts of history writing and history telling processes. And she proposed to explore subjective and individual stories in the frame of collective history and movement history and make them visible. So here you see the artists and scholars Karina Griffith, Natasha A. Kelly, and Corinna Kwame, who dealt with tactics of uncracking and decolonizing the archives of 1968 in their presentations to access and reinterpret documents, film reels, flyers, texts, and correspondence in order to retell stories, biographies, and to contradict terms like this idea of there would be just one feminist movement of 68. And here we see cultural workers Sharon Adler and Merle Stöber, Eliana Renner, and I forgot about her name. The last, this is a, maybe I find it in our small catalog. Don't, because this is. So, Elżbieta Sternlicht. So, these four. They are found together for an intergenerational roundtable on the perspectives of Jewish feminists and artists who were active in 1968 and afterwards, and who met back then in a climate that was also in the subculture protest movement scene, let's say, partially characterized by anti-Semitism. And in this conversation, they also draw an arc into the present in order to find out how Jewish feminist artists position themselves today and which experience were and are made in different time and social contexts. Yeah, these are just a few examples of this series. Revolt, she said, the respective events were designed and moderated by the various curators and active participants. And so we, as a space like Alpha Nova and Galerie Futura and District as well, we just offered the resources, the curatorial, logistic, and financial support to realize the events. And here we have also a little small catalog, which we will give to you, of course, later. But yeah, it's partly in English, partly in German. But yeah, it's kind of nice documents that we have still of this project. So especially with Revolt, she said, but also with other projects we are involved in. One very central question for us is always who is telling whose story. So that means to show how hegemonic historiography and representation are constructed, and which role in particular race and gender and also other social constructed categories, of course, play for visibility. And it's always important to take a self-empowering perspective and to speak from a self-empowering position in order to reject discriminatory provisions, to fill gaps in history, to strengthen and to normalize other narratives without removing them from their political significance. And a crucial point out of our diverse positions and backgrounds while working together in the field of art. So we have to review constantly this question. So who gives whom space to speak, and how and under what conditions are representation practices shaped?
Yeah, and so of course, after giving you this insight into projects that we did like within the last years, of course, there's always some problematic aspects or aspects that like kind of for us they're kind of like hard to solve, since as artistic directors we have to deal with like everyday practices, like considering to keep in mind like that what we do like with working in like certain structures, including for example questions of fair pay, like we have like funding but it's like very limited, so how can we actually like as a feminist institution really do fair pay, and like avoiding precarious working conditions, whatever that might means, and then also like dealing with the pros and cons of institutionalizing or becoming maybe an market-orientated space, which we are not, but of course like this always like implements your work, and of course also like the questions of actively participating actors in these spaces. And as we said before, Alpha Nova Galerie Futura is funded by the Berlin City Council, which allows us to realize a program and to pay for collaborators for their work, while also getting paid for our own work. And however, this situation, it seems like, or sounds great, but it's still very precarious, and our budget is very low. And I think like we also like, you know, I don't know if you write down your working hours, I don't. So, and generally, like if we would like to realize larger projects that are not covered by our current funding, we always need to acquire third-party funds. And sometimes this is successful, and sometimes, of course, not really, or not. And when certain projects are underfunded or like not funded at all, we often unintentionally then reproduce the exploitative system of that is very present in the field of arts, by not being able to pay a proper fee, but maybe also like, you know, more like a symbolic one. Yeah, and in this sense we face the political and moral dilemma that we reproduce the conditions we actually want to fight, not so the structures we are in, we're kind of like reproducing them again. And therefore one question is how to deal with these contradictions, and should we really follow the motto like something is better than nothing, so we have the resource of the space, we have the resource of like ourselves like getting paid and having this how you call like kind of human workforce, but where are the limits and what is like really acceptable then, especially when you have different projects, some are like funded and then you pay certain artists and certain people more for this one, and for other projects that are not funded you pay like way less even though it's the same work. So of course, very tough one that we might discuss with you later. And although we can only offer a modest fee if like there's not extra funding and production budget, it is still attractive to most artists in the city. I mean, Berlin is a city full of like a lot of artists, so of course a lot of people search for possibilities to show their work and to be represented. So therefore, it is important that these preconditions for working conditions are transparent at the beginning of a cooperation, and that is discussed together with all the participants whether, and if so, how a specific project can be implemented, even with a budget that is small or less than actually planned. So we always are very, very transparent of like how much money we have and why certain projects have more money, or why we pay certain fees and to certain people, and not like we cannot like always pay the same fees. And in everyday practice of Alpha Nova and Galerie Futura, bringing together different spatially related concerns and needs is also not without its problems. We position ourselves as a place that offers alternatives to commercially oriented art spaces. So you could say that we see ourselves as a kind of lab, maybe. However, a high degree of self-organization is demanded also by the artists. So it's not like that you arrive and you have like us doing, unfortunately, everything. Just like cannot do that. We certainly offer support in the conception, in the organization and installation as well of an exhibition, but the artist's own resources are very essential as well. They often draw upon their own networks for assistance. So thus, every collaboration is different, as I said before, depending on the financial resources of the specific exhibition or general project, but also on the needs that the artists have expressed to us as artistic directors. So some artists prefer to curate their exhibitions alone, others want curatorial advice from us, with still others we develop an exhibition together in many meetings and discussions over a long period of time. And despite very different collaboration scenarios, all those involved usually invest a remarkable amount of emotional labor in respective individual projects. And it is also important then to set limits for us. For example, when the emotional support of a project becomes too excessive, or when we as a gallery, as gallery directors, become mere service providers within the project's realization. So it is often difficult to meet all the different needs. And of course, like, communication is here always key, and sometimes it works and sometimes it's a bit more problematic, as we all might know. Yeah, so, and this arrangement offers the curatorial freedom somehow of not having to exhibit in a profit-oriented manner, but there isn't a network of collectors or institutional curators backing Alpha Nova and Galerie Futura, which could also ultimately benefit the artist. And visibility is primarily generated in a particular specific community, which can be empowering, but having said this, also deprives a wider audience. So in general, we have like a community, or we have an audience that comes and goes all the time, but as we talked before, it is more maybe not like only a community, but a network that is created, because with every project, new people learn about the space, new people come. So even like for people being in Berlin, sometimes like, oh, okay, wow, you have been existing since, I don't know, like so long, but it's the first time I hear from you. So it's really, in a city like Berlin, where a lot of people come and go, there's always like new networks, new people, new audiences that are generated within the, like, with the program. And yeah, in a location like Berlin, with its very diverse exhibition spaces and a lot of exhibition spaces, it is also a challenge for us to get the attention of the press and other public bodies. Cooperation with various funding agencies or foundation can slightly change this, and different publics can therefore be created. And as I said before, with each cooperation, it's not only important for us to assess who you are getting involved with, but also how to deal with their possible influence.
Yeah, and maybe a last, oh, thank you. A last problematic point we would like to mention, and we already addressed it before, is the fact that the team members of Alpha Nova Galerie Futura, so Sylvia and me at the moment at least, so the one who are running the space, we are, of course, produce permanent exclusions by choosing certain topics and by inviting certain people to collaborate, and we cannot ignore, but rather have to problematize the fact that we are white academic women and who are, yeah, the artistic directors, and therefore also create a kind of, yeah, public, and also create a kind of similar audience, and because of our networks of, and also reproduce in a practical way a space that is wide, although the ideal situation would be to create a more heterogeneous, inclusive space. And so even if our situation is in one way or the other precarious, still we definitely have privileges that need to be made transparent. So And we ask ourselves, how can we share power, responsibility, and resources in a more open and transparent way? And what are the preconditions for practices based on honest solidarity and involvement? And we think it is necessary to have a permanent debate on and reflection on these aforementioned problematic aspects and questions. And sometimes just the reflection is not enough. So therefore the process-based task remains, to which, let's say, codes or a code of conduct we jointly have to develop, and how this one can actually be implemented in daily practice. Yeah. So in general, some closing ideas. So in general, it's important to us to remain mindful and open in our work in order to offer artists and cultural workers a wide range of opportunities to connect. In Italy, short temporary cooperations produce long-term collaborations related to fundamental questions about the possibilities and strategies for structural change, also in the field of art, and as well as equitable distribution and inclusion. However, this requires definitely an ongoing commitment and a self-reflection and a process-based work that is doesn't necessarily have a kind of end product, but especially for these kind of long-term works, they are lacking financial resources and often the time capacities. So, this is really a challenge, I would say. But despite of these, anyway, all these little and bigger challenges that we have to face, we still think that we, somehow produce a kind of, at least, or make a small practical contribution, let's say, to a long-term change and rethinking of the art world, also with our, space policy, I would say.
Let's hope.
Let's hope. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.